Welcome to the Holding Time podcast. Here we discuss breastfeeding in all its complexity, the ups and downs, the challenges and the triumphs. Whether you are expectant, a new mother, or simply interested, I hope you'll appreciate the incredible warrior women featured in this series. In this mini-series, we go back to feature some mothers who helped to shape the Holding Time project in Coventry. These interviews took place over Zoom in 2020, quite often under lockdown. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. Find out more by visiting holdingtime.org or support us on our Patreon channel, Holding Time.
And even like the normality of like having to anti-back your hands and that sort of thing, that was normal life for us. It had been a sort of, in some cases, been a bit of a battle to sort of have other people, if they were coming over, to sort of have that mindset, because it just wasn't normal. But for us, it was normal. And then now we're like, why did we not make people wear masks? That's clearly what we should have been doing. But that would have obviously, for socially, that would have been a step too far, but not now.
It's a lot less taboo now, isn't it?
In some ways, it's been really good for him to have that year to like grow up and not have to go back into hospital like he had previously, just be able to sort of, get bigger and get stronger without the risk of getting stuff. Yeah, it's been really helpful.
So do you mind telling me the condition that he was born with, or what was the context around that?
He was born at 25 weeks. So he was born considered as a micro premature baby. So he was 1 pound 15 ounces when he was born. Like what you see, like he's one of those super teeny tiny babies that you can just fit in your hand. He was just born really tiny. And then actually very much connected to the idea of feeding, he contracted something called NEC at NEC, which is a condition where it meant that he got a really severe infection in his intestines that actually meant that he ended up with 9 perforations, and basically meant that he then had to have life-saving surgery at 9 days old. So at 9 days old, weighing a little less under 2 pounds, he had to have an operation where he had a third of his bowel removed, and then he had a stoma formed. So obviously everything came out into like the little bags. Obviously those bags are massive when you're this small, because they only make them so small. So he had that for 15 weeks. When he got up to it, he was able to have 5 mils of milk every 2 hours, and that was it. So basically his whole digestive system had to be completely rested for all of that time, really. He had the 5 mils just to keep it ticking over, but already that was pretty much too much for his body to be able to cope with, so he couldn't go any more than that. And that's a crazily small amount of milk. That's tiny. I mean, that was like 70 mils in 24 hours. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So he was able to have a teaspoon of milk. That was it for 15 weeks. So all of his nutrition really was put into his veins. And then he had that reversed. So all sewn back all up together again and all back inside before he was able to come home, actually on his due date.
So when you said you were in hospital for a month?
Yes. So that is because I was on a tilted upside down bed for a month, where I wasn't able to get out of bed for anything at all, in the hope to try and literally gravity keep him in. So because I was tilted upside down, he literally couldn't be born because I was upside down. That's what I had. Yeah. That was an interesting 5 weeks for me as well. The idea of people when they say like, cross your legs to keep them in, I was like, no, I literally was upside down, not moving, and wasn't allowed to like lift my head off a pillow or anything, or do anything those 5 weeks to make sure that he stayed in as long as possible. But then ironically, he was actually born via emergency C-section in the end. So it was actually 25 weeks and 1 day, and that extra day was, because it would have made a big difference. So they went literally as long as possible. So at that point, it was by hour. Literally every hour you're in, you're growing and developing more. So they kept him in as long as possible.
That's phenomenal.
Quite an introduction to having a baby.
So this is why you were pumping and putting milk into the drawer. God.
For me, the expressing was like a 2-part. Obviously, a lot of the other mums that were in the NICU with me that were expressing, not that there were many, they were obviously expressing because they had to keep up with the demand of the baby. So even though the baby was being tube fed, which Jacob obviously was as well, but to a much lesser extent, they were having to keep up with demand of what the baby was actually taking. And, the baby was having milk, every 2 hours, and it was quite substantial amounts. And, there was that need, so they were using up what they were pumping. And obviously they did have often they had a bit of excess. But for me, obviously, 1 pump would equal more than he would have in the whole 24 hours. So for me, I was doing it on twofold. One, in case we weren't able to actually get him to latch and things, and then I'd have a bit of, have a couple of months worth of milk that he could have when he was able to feed orally, but also just to keep my milk up to hopefully get him to latch, which obviously he then did.
I'm imagining he was first of all on a bottle, was he?
No.
Did he go straight from the tube to the nipple?
Yes, that was my choice to do that. So he actually had one bottle, and that was just to make sure that we could limit how much he had. So he had one bottle and to check that he could swallow properly. And
literally.
Yeah, so he was allowed his 5 mils, which in a bottle is like nothing. So he was allowed his 5 mils in a bottle, partly to make sure that he didn't have mouth aversion, and also just to check he could swallow and that sort of thing, which was fine. And then he was able to go straight to breast, which was intense and hard work and very interesting within a very medical surrounding, doing something like that. And it being, so one of my pieces was obviously about being given permission to do it. That was also a big part of it.
So tell me about that first time. You were obviously in an ICU.
Yeah, so we were. So he'd just had his reversal, so he'd just come through another set of surgery. And that was the first time then. It was only a few days after his surgery that we then moved out of the high intensity. So we were in maximum, like the ICU, so the intensive care. We were in that for the whole time because he was, if your nutrition is provided through your veins, and you have to be in the intensive area. So we'd only just moved out into sort of a slightly less, so it was still high dependency, but it sort of had a slightly different feel. At that point, he was being tube fed, but tube feeds were going up. So rather than 5 mils, he was sort of being able to have a bit more milk. So there was sort of, that had already been a big step. And it was a complete surprise. So every day I was there from like 8 till 8 every day to meet the doctors in the morning as they came onto shift, and also to do the night shift, like check who the staff were in the night shift. But in that morning, they came around and did the morning doctors round. So all the doctors that are looking after all the babies come around. So you always have like sort of maybe 5 or 6 doctors come to your baby every day and talk about the plan for the day. So what's the objectives? And so obviously you didn't really know what was going to be said at that point. And often you could sort of say, well, it was just the same as yesterday, just continuing with feeds. Yes, generally doing okay, monitoring this, checking that. But then that day, the doctor was like, oh, and how is he doing with his feeds? Yeah, they're going right. It's like, oh, I think we could probably look at, the mother breastfeeding. Because, obviously they knew that I was expressing because I actually chose to express next to him. So I hired my own pump so I could express next to him rather than having to go off to the room separate and express there. So I basically was always there. The doctors, whenever they were around, constantly expressing. And obviously we've been there for 15 weeks, so they definitely get to know you. So they all knew I was definitely expressing. And then they said, so you can have a go later on today. And it was just like, what? Today? I felt so unprepared, even though I'd obviously been spending all that time waiting for it.
Where do I get I need everything.
Yeah, like, what do I do? Like, I was pretty experienced at expressing, but then I was like, I don't know how to do it. What do I do? Like, how would I possibly do this? Like, and it was just...
And what size was he at that time?
At that point, he was probably around 5 pounds.
Okay,
maybe
so
maybe a little under
a newborn baby.
Yeah, like maybe a bit small, a small newborn. Yeah, maybe a little bit smaller. Yeah, still attached to lots of things. Still had his tube. Still had things in his arms. Still had, was still connected. There's so much when you pick up a baby that's in NICU, they're nearly always attached to machinery and they've got lots of different wires and things. So you're constantly faffing with all of those, as well as a baby. You're sat on hospital chairs and it's really uncomfortable, and you don't have pillows and stuff. You don't have anything that you can use to prop up, and because it's all sort of a sterile environment. So suddenly you're just sort of like, well, the idea of like, oh, well, get yourself comfortable, lean back a bit, put some pillows, like none of that happens. So you're then trying to feed a bit, like do all of those things. You're not in a bed or anything. You're just sort of sat on a plastic chair, like suddenly being like, all right, I've got my baby, but what do I do now? And it was, a huge fumble, and obviously it was amazing to do, but it wasn't like this amazing euphoric experience of like, oh, yes.
Nobody said to put him on your chest and let him bob?
No, and of course, the thing is, obviously, he'd been on my chest a lot.
Have you ever tried to bob down?
No, not really. But then obviously he was so tiny. For a long time, he couldn't really even move himself at all. Because when I first held him, he was, really super teeny tiny. I mean, literally, when I'm holding him, like, I've got his bottom here and I've got, like, all of his back here.
Yeah.
So he's so small. The thing we had done is actually, he's never had one since he's been out of NICU. But while he was in NICU, he did actually have a dummy, because I often put a dummy in while I was giving him his tube feed, just to connect the two things. Not that I ever made him full, because it was 5 mils, but to connect the two things together. And he had a really good like sucking. Yeah, he was
That's
quite
good.
early actually being able to suck. We didn't think there was going to be a problem with that, in that we knew he had the sucking sort of reflex, of which he did straight away. Like, that was not a problem. So as soon as I started latching him, he definitely knew what to do. Like, it was instant. Like, he definitely knew that that's what he wanted to do, and he was quite happy to be. And obviously, like, he fall asleep really quickly to begin with, because obviously it was so much. And to learn to swallow, suck, and breathe. Because even at that point, he hadn't that long been off breathing apparatus either. So actually just breathing on your own was quite a big thing for him, let alone all these other things as well. And then actually I was really lucky, because not all hospitals had the ability, but I was able to room in for 2 weeks. So then I was able to live at the hospital for 2 weeks. Whenever he needed a feed, I could do them. I could, be there for him to do that. So overnight as well.
Was that at Cov and Warwick?
Actually, we ended up in Leicester. So he was born at Coventry, and we were there until he needed his surgery. And then we had to move to Leicester because they're the surgical experts. And actually, because he then was classed as a surgical baby, we wouldn't have been allowed home, ironically, until he was able to breastfeed. And then we could have gone back to Coventry, but we would have only been there for 2 weeks. So given that they knew us and we'd been there for a long time and we got routine and all of that, we just stayed at Leicester for those final 2 weeks.
I'm sort of a little bit familiar with the kinds of support that there is for critically ill babies, but it does look to me like quite a brutal process for the parents, especially the mother.
I think so. I realised in the project that I wrote quite negatively about the experience of expressing within the hospital and the support or lack of it, and the sort of the structures that were put in place, because there's, on one hand, there's the idea that, that the hospital definitely want you to express, because obviously it is better. Like, it is better for these tiny premature babies. The formula, formula actually, if a premature baby is given formula, they're much, much more likely to get the infection that Jacob had. So more premature babies die of neck than anything else. It's an absolute catastrophic illness that a lot of premature babies get, and there's no cure for it. You just have to hope that actually by removing the intestines that are infected and sort of joining it all back up together again, that they won't get it again, and that they've got everything. And it's really important. Like, it's, it's the biggest killer of premature babies, and it's much more likely to happen if you formula feed. So in that sense, obviously the hospitals want you to express, because they want you to have, they want the babies to have breast milk. But yet at the same time, because so few mums actually take that up or continue with it or do it, the facilities that are there are awful. Coventry, arguably marginally better, but the whole experience of doing it is just awful. It's just hard, because often the nurses that are looking after, they obviously do have experience. They don't all have specialist training in it, so they don't have the knowledge, really.
The Royal Brompton, they do have specialist maternity nurses who are trained well in supporting women through expressing, and they're really knowledgeable, and that's what they do. Like, I interviewed the woman whose job was expressing.
But not all hospitals have that.
Yeah.
Postcode lottery, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the really practical things that I found really difficult, and one of the reasons why I chose to express by him, the first thing, you have to leave your baby. So you're in the hospital and you want to be with your baby, but, regularly, every few hours, you're expected or required to leave and go down to a little, corridor, down through to a little horrible room with a curtain and a plastic chair. Like you used to have at school halls, like a plastic chair and express in a room that's got no windows and is dark, and it's just, a bit grubby, and just like, it's just a horrible experience. And for me, the thing that I really hated about it was that you had to buzz through, because obviously it's high security, you have to buzz through 5 or 6 doors. So what would take you 2 minutes to go and get your expressing kit from the sterilizer and that smell, you have to go and get your expressing kit. Then you have to buzz back through to get back through to the other door, to go back into the expressing room, to then use it, to then have to go back through, and there were rules and expectations, every day you had to sign to say you definitely changed your sterilizing water. But it was so school-like, you have a little note saying you haven't updated it today. I'm like, well, yeah, because I wasn't in hospital, I wasn't there, or I didn't use it, or I used my own kit, or it was just so horrible. And you'd spend ages just waiting the wrong side of a door just to get through to deal with your milk. And then I had to obviously leave it on the side, which obviously I brought up in my piece. You just sort of had to I've got this milk, and they're like, oh yeah, just leave it on the side. You're like, I don't know you. It feels kind of like a really personal act. It feels like something really important. I don't know if you're going to put it in the freezer in time. I don't know like who you are, but yeah, here you are. Here's my baby's milk. Just do what you like with it. Just completely lost its feeling of like, yeah, being something kind of special in a bond between me and Jacob. That definitely wasn't how it felt. Not until I directly breastfed.
Yeah. So when you directly breastfed, how was that by comparison?
To begin with, still, like in those first 2 weeks, the whole reason why we were in hospital is he was sort of ready to go home, apart from that, you know, we needed to be able to make sure that he could feed. So then there was like a real pressure of like, right, we've got like the longer it takes us to get this established, the longer we have to be in hospital for. And all we wanted to do was go home. You know, you're really exhausted by that point. So there was like a lot of pressure on it. But also, again, like not that nice, like, I was really lucky. Like one of my absolute best friends now it was a breastfeeding peer supporter who was also breastfeeding her NICU baby, and we've become really close, and we were like, basically our stories followed. So we ended up in the same room a couple of weeks behind each other. So she'd already moved into the room, and then like 2 weeks later I was like, hello, I'm here, we're back reunited. And she was really supportive and gave loads of help, loads of advice, gave me like places to look for like reputable advice and all of that, because the nurses were just like, oh, I'll put the screens around you. I'm like, no, I don't want to have the screens around me. I don't want to be like segregated from everyone else and not be able to see out and be enclosed. And also if I need your help, I need to be able to like get your help. And then just like learning how to do it, they were just sort of like, you know, very forceful, but not, I don't know, not in a good way, I didn't think. But it took us, yeah, it was, oh my goodness, it was so painful. And it transpired that Jacob had a tongue tie, but you can only have a tongue tie corrected within the first 12 weeks of life, which of course, by the time we were breastfeeding, he was already 15 weeks old. So we couldn't actually have it dealt with. So we just had to feed through a tongue tie and a tiny baby and way too much supply. That was the thing that I really struggled with.
Yeah, I can imagine you would have massive supply, because I expressed for 4 months. I mean, I didn't have anything like that level of trauma. I've witnessed women going through that, and it's really brutal, and I'm sorry to hear about it. It's just also unnecessary as well. It kills me. And often the midwives really know this isn't good enough. They know, and they're working there every day.
Yeah.
But because of budget cuts and all this crap, women are just being treated like really wrong. It's a really wrong patient experience, and it happens, I think, a lot in the NHS, and I think a lot of it is just coming from the top. Those are my thoughts, basically.
Yeah. I mean, the cost of all the treatment that obviously Jacob didn't get it through formula, but the cost of like all of that treatment, if you were more supportive and encouraging and like had a nice environment for the breastfeeding mother, then you probably would have less babies that sick that then needed to stay in hospital with all those resources. I mean, it was costing, obviously the cost of Jacob being in hospital, we would never be able to think about the cost of that. Like, it's literally thousands of pounds every single day for him to be in hospital. And he was there for 105 days. Like, the amount of money that cost was crazy. So we're really grateful to the NHS. But we probably wouldn't have been there as long and saved some of that money if we'd have had better support, and we could have got out quicker, because breastfeeding would have been better. And it's funny, isn't it, how they're all connected? But
my experience of expressing, and I think it's quite common, is that you build up your supply really, really amazingly fast. You know,
you can
by like week 4, you might be producing enough milk in one go for the whole day. You know, and certainly,
yeah, if you establish it well, then definitely. And especially if you're breastfeeding a premature baby, because obviously they have less milk anyway. Like, obviously Jacob was extreme, but you generally don't need
to. But you're still the same amount. As if you'd had a baby at 9 months.
And that was the interesting thing about the medical side, is that they did have knowledge about expressing, and they did have knowledge about breastfeeding, but they had absolutely no knowledge of how to go from one to the other, because they didn't have very many mums go from one to the other. So they had a small number of people that expressed, but then gave up before their baby was actually big enough to feed. In the end, they ended up moving on to, using up bottle feeds, using up the milk they've got, and then formula feeding. That was one route. Or the babies would be small, but able to directly breastfeed immediately. And they'd have good support on that. They'd have very few mums that were able to keep up expressing for that long within that environment and with that stress level, and keep their milk enough to be able to transition from one to the other. That was an even tinier proportion of people that started expressing. So they had like no knowledge of how to go from one to the other.
And do you think that's because when you said in that kind of stress environment, is that because expressing in itself is too demanding, or do you think that's down to the resources that they put to supporting mothers who are expressing?
I think obviously, as you will know, expressing is like, it's time consuming in some ways, and it's just like, it's a lot of work, isn't it? And it's like constant, like, but very regular, like very sort of, it's not like, oh, I can just pick up my baby and fit it around, do other things. And it's not like that, especially with like in that situation, you know, you're traveling back and forth to hospital and you're exhausted and you're like generally stressed and you're trying to fit in all of your life in like an hour when you get home before you're shattered and need to go to bed. And like, I think just doing it, I think just physically doing the expressing that regularly to keep your supply up for that long while, you know, your baby is having numerous operations or procedures, or, you know, there's always setbacks. There's always setbacks in NICU. There's no baby that goes into NICU and like has no setbacks at all. Even if it's like a little blip, you're on the edge all the time. And basically, if your baby's in NICU, I don't know if it's for everyone, but fundamentally, there's a real sense of, I could lose my baby at any point. Like at any point, I could just, you know, you're waiting to go home, but you just don't know that's a guarantee. For me, I'd already had a little girl before Jacob who we didn't get to bring home from hospital. So it was a very real experience for me that I might not have him. So you're living with that every single day. So trying to like go, oh, just relax and express and keep it going in that experience. And also away from your child, obviously, because you're having to express at home, away from your baby and all of that. I think it's just hard for women to actually be able to do that and have the mindset and the resilience to do it is quite hard.
Possibly in defence of the hospital, that's what they see on a day-to-day basis. And so that might be also why they don't want to create more expectation around expressing than there is already.
I think they also definitely, at like Leicester, they definitely suffered from the, don't force me to breastfeed. So then they didn't say anything. But then it was difficult because those people that actually needed the support and did want to breastfeed were caught in that loop of like the people that felt very defensive. And I still see it now. Like if I post anything about breastfeeding on like my Instagram or anything, like, oh, you're shaming us formula feeders. I'm like, no, but we're the minority. Breastfeeding mothers are a minority. Like, I'm not shaming you. I'm just trying to promote something that is in the minority, because we are. And I think that was interesting because I think they basically had a lot of fight back from people saying, you know, like, it's really important to breastfeed and these are all the benefits to do it. You really should have a go. But obviously you're doing that a couple of hours after you've just given birth to a premature baby. And I think that sometimes it's just too much. Or like I saw quite a few mums like have a go for like 2 or 3 days, but that was it. I think that's a really difficult thing, especially when formula is just so easy. It's just there.
It has to be the right kind of support, and it also depends on, you know, sometimes they've got other children. They're also trying to look after home, and it is sad though, isn't it? If you say that formula is going to increase the risk of an infection which might endanger the child's life, it's like that is.
And I didn't know that. Yeah, I didn't know that until after Jacob had already got it. And so it didn't make a difference for us because we'd already only breastfed him anyway. But it was interesting. Like it was just, I just knew I was going to breastfeed. And oh my goodness, that first like couple of hours of like trying to collect the colostrum, like by squeezing your nipples, like I've got no idea what I'm doing and this is so hard. And like, you're literally happy with like 0.3 of a mil.
And how is Jacob now?
Yeah, really, really good. Really good. I mean, so we still breastfeed, which is amazing. Like, so he's nearly 2. We're still breastfeeding. So the fact that, like, the percentage, obviously, as you know, the percentage of women that breastfeed, tiny. Percentage of people that have a NICU baby that breastfeed, even smaller. Percentage of people, like, that breastfeed are 25 weeker, super, super teeny tiny. And then to breastfeed, like, beyond 1, like, that percentage is so small. I feel so proud that we've done it. We always call him the booby monster because for a nearly 2, he feeds a lot. Like, he's always has.
Given the general description that you've just given us, you know, there's like a bit of a miracle. Anyone who breastfeeds, they are the exception. They're in the minority for a reason.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think the society aspect, I guess I just didn't really know about it. I just didn't expect to have so much negativity around it. Like, I just didn't think that would happen. I think I was sort of let off because Jacob was premature, and like, so there was like some kind of acceptance of it because
he
obviously needed it. So there's that understanding that I think in some ways that there is reasons why breastfeeding is considered the first choice, should be from a medical perspective considered the first choice. But I just wasn't expecting to face any negativity or any sort of bite back from breastfeeding my child. Like, I just didn't expect to see it, but yeah, we did. Like, not a lot, but you know, enough here and there. I was really surprised.
And where did the negativity come from? Is it social media, or is it, you mentioned Instagram, or is
Yes. So I think to a very, very tiny extent, sort of relatives, just little comments here and there. Things like, well, surely you'll stop when he's got teeth, like he's getting teeth now, so you'll stop. And, you know, because obviously there's all of those things. I think the reason why I like my friend is because, you know, obviously I said, you know, Jacob still feeds through the night. It's not that I'm complaining about it. It's an observation. And, you know, sometimes that's really hard. But you almost feel like you can't say anything negative about your breastfeeding experience.
Well, they just go, give him formula. What's your problem?
Yeah, exactly.
Yourself is very interesting.
Definitely that.
Yeah.
And so, well, you know, just give them water, or why don't you give them something solid, like start solids earlier, because that'll help them sleep better, and like all of those things, like the misunderstanding really, like, and it was the same for me, like I've done so much research now, I feel like I definitely know more, but misunderstanding of what actually helps a child and what breastfeeding actually is and what breast milk has and what it does.
What's replaced knowledge and experience is received truths, cultural biases, quite a lot of prejudice, and then a load of medical stuff that hasn't actually really helped.
Yeah, like I think a lot of things weren't ever said in a negative way or said in a way to like try and stop me from doing something I wanted. They're just misguided comments.
Though. They're belittling. When you've gone through what you've gone through and you've won the prize of being able to feed your child, who needs it so much and will probably need it till he might well need it till he's 4. And that will change his health outcomes for his whole life. As well as yours.
Yeah.
But, I mean, especially his. You're in it and you're doing it and you should be getting these. This is why women are giving each other awards.
Yeah.
You should be getting awards. Like, you should be getting this. That's what's so sad. I think that's what is really, really hard. I really feel it. I can kind of remember it viscerally, the unfairness of that, of like, you know, you're someone who cares about my child. You should be thanking me. Like, you should be buying me presents and sending me cards because I'm doing this, not telling me I should stop moaning and give him formula.
It's crazy the world we live in, and like the things you buy into, like I'd already bought bottles for him just because I assumed that, like, you just see that. I just was like, oh, I must get baby stuff. Surely bottles are one of the things I need. I literally have never touched them. I've never opened them. I've loved the fact that I've kept this box that are fully sealed because I was like, yes, look at that. Never needed them. The thing that I find, because I do have knowledge of it, so Jacob is prone to a number of diseases in the future, obviously around his bowels, so he's more prone to get Crohn's and things. But literally, the longer I breastfeed him for, that reduces that possibility.
Thanks for listening, and thanks to everyone involved, our funders, the Infant Feeding Team and University Hospital Coventry and Warwick for their support, along with all the amazing mothers and partners who helped to make this project happen. You can learn more about the project by visiting holdingtime.org and support us on our Patreon channel. There's a link in the description. Thanks for listening, and be sure to like, follow or subscribe so you don't miss any of our content.